We are going to be talking about one of my favorite categories of all time. I loved it so much that I went ahead and opened up a full bar dedicated to sugarcane and agave spirits. I've got two there, I've got one over there. So we're gonna get into this pretty quickly. Mezcal is one of my passions. I have been to Oaxaca before, and this is one of the great joys of what I do. So we've got some incredible mezcales on the table today. Shout out to my boy Kyle over there with Vintegrity. They're one of our distributors that we get a ton of mezcal from. Vintegrity gave us a couple banger bottles today. We're talking in the hundreds of dollars to pour. So we've got some really crazy shit that we get to drink today. So I'm very, very excited. So very quickly, what are we gonna be talking about? All right, we're gonna be talking about mezcal, what it is, where it comes from, how it's produced, the different styles of mezcal that exist out in the world, and then as well as then problems that exist inside the category, right? Because inside of many of the spirits that we carry here, we are very specific in our curation because there are lots of different places that produce, and only some of them do it inside of a manner that we think we can agree with and get behind, right? Pardon me. I had Lulu's right before this, and I haven't been talking a whole lot, so it's everything's still settling, and I'm I'm gonna go pound mezcal now and talk about it. Finally, we're gonna talk about how to pick mezcal. At the very end, I will go ahead and field some questions if we have time, but I am on track right now. I have so many slides and so much to cover. So let's get into what mezcal is, right? I feel like I'm gonna keep walking in front of this. This is the joy of doing the class inside of a new space. I have to figure out exactly where I wanna set everything. So, before we get into talking about what mezcal is though, I think it's important that we taste it. So at your tables, you have these little agave mugs, right? Those are your spit cups. Today we have got plenty of alcohol on the table. If you consume all of it and you have a cocktail, or even if you don't have a cocktail today, you're gonna consume more than what legally you should drive on. So I highly recommend utilizing your spit cup. Now, every single class, I am going to teach people how to taste spirits, right? I had the joy and pleasure of learning from Master Sommelier Doug Frost as well as Steve Olson. Steve Olson was actually one of the people who helped bring 100% Blue Weber agave tequila into the United States, and then later helped to make Del Maguey Mezcal famous. So these are two good friends of mine, two very huge mentors and titans of the industry. And so if they taught me, I trust them. And so I'm gonna teach you exactly how they taught me to taste. So when we are tasting spirits, right? We're first gonna take the glass, and you are going to notice that I do the wrong thing. I have already torched my nostrils, right? So you do not want to just bury your nose into the glass, right? What's gonna happen is all of the alcohol that is inside of the glass is going to start to evaporate, and it is going to torch your nostrils, okay? That's really bad if you want to go through the tasting process and start to enjoy this, right? So start with the glass, I'd say 6 to 8 inches away from your face, and work your way in. And what you're gonna do is you're just gonna take breaths in through your nose. You're gonna smell the mezcal, get to know it, have a little, discussion. How are you? I'm well, thank you very much. And then we're gonna take a little sip, all right? This first sip, we're not thinking about, right? This first sip is to wash out that wonderful pork rangoon that I had, a little bit of the pho that I followed it with, right? And it's to just kind of acclimate our palates, because we're going into this and we've gone through a whole day, right? We probably haven't been drinking spirits all day long, and they're a little abrasive, especially what we have poured out today. They're phenomenal, but they're big and flavorful. So we're gonna take one little taste, hold it in our mouth, swish it around, kind of wash everything out, swallow or spit. And then on the second sip, after you swallow or spit, you're going to take a breath in through your mouth and exhale through your nose. What this does is this takes the aroma of the spirit and it puts it over our olfactory bulbs. Jared, I've got two right here. So it puts it over your olfactory bulbs, right? Which are in charge of coming up with about 75 to 80% of what we perceive as flavor, right? Actually quite unstudied. They live underneath our cheekbones, but it's very important to do this step because you'll taste a whole lot more, especially when you're sick. This is a great way, if you have to do a tasting when you're sick and talk about what you're tasting, it's a great way to go ahead and smell everything, all right? So let's go ahead and take our first sip. Let's go ahead and talk about what we taste here, right? We all grew up with different life experiences, so we all perceive things a little bit differently. So no one has a palate that's better than someone else's. We're all working with the same equipment up top. But what we do have here is people who are really good at detecting, like, this feels familiar, this tastes familiar, and they're also great at identifying. Mezcal itself, when we're tasting it, you know, there are gonna be things that you might be like, oh, it tastes good, right? Let's start there. What does it taste like? It tastes good. I enjoy this. I fucking hate this, right? It's okay to have polarizing opinions here. But then if you are so brave, and I would encourage you to, start to call out what you think you may taste in it, right? So inside of this mezcal, someone might describe it as meaty, right? That doesn't mean that there's actual like cork fat inside of this, but it has this kind of like porky richness and sweetness and meatiness to it, almost leathery, right? So let's go ahead and get into it. Easiest way is to kind of think about what you could be tasting. Think about minerality, think about acidity, think about fruits that it could remind you of, think about vegetables, think about then weird funky things it could remind you of, right? So let's get into it. Trust your palates here. What do you all taste?
Mezcal.
You win the class.
Bacon.
Bacon? Perfect. Are we talking like raw, cured bacon? Are we talking cooked? Okay, is this like the floppy kind or the crispy kind that you can break?
It's a little bit floppy.
A little bit floppy. This is great. I love this. This is perfect. This is a great introduction to this.
A little bit floppy.
All right, we got some from the middle of the room. I need my sides to start talking to me. What do you get? Leathery? Leathery aroma. Perfect. What else are we getting?
Campfire.
Campfire?
Green Szechuan peppercorns.
Green Szechuan peppercorns. Fuck yeah. That kind of tingly feeling that's not gonna leave your mouth right now. What else? You guys aren't wrong. I just need to hear something from you. Absolutely. Salinity, peppercorn. What else?
Yeah, a little spice too.
A little bit of spice. Absolutely. Now, what kind of spice? Like, are we talking heat spice? Are we talking like subtle warm spice? Warm? Definitely.
Spice. That would be more like
I'm so happy to say.
All right. So, appreciate you. Thanks so much. Anyway,
Thank you.
so mezcal is a distilled product made from fermented aguamel honey water, right? So what they're doing is they're taking the agaves, they're cooking them in stone underground pits, basically, which we'll get more into the production of all of this in a little bit. The mezcal can be made from 49 to 51 different kinds of agave, depending who you ask. And believe it or not, actually, this first agave that we are sipping today is made specifically from this plant. So you can pass this around if you'd like to. This is part of the reason that we have our agaves here. So this is angustifolia. This is espadín, right? So espadín is going to be the most cultivated and used agave, but this is what it comes from. This is the little baby version of it, and it's grown up right now. Maybe one of these days it'll get big enough that we can turn it into a piña and then make our own mezcal, which would be fucking crazy, but I kind of, you know, guy can dream, you know, hope, right? So, styles, right? In mezcal, there are styles like tequila, but they are different in how the nomenclature works, and also they're different in the rules. If a mezcal is just labeled mezcal and not artisanal or ancestral, we know that it's industrial, right? This is the shit that you don't want to drink. This is not going to be similar to any of the mezcales that we carry here at Fern Bar, right? So importantly, we're gonna break down the process of how you make the thing so we can better understand what makes great mezcal and what makes dog shit mezcal, right? This one right here, cooking can be done in underground ovens, stone basins, super traditional, or autoclaves. Now, who here remembers what an autoclave is? You work with them? You wanna take a shot at what they are? Please do it.
Huh? It's an incinerator.
Yep,
Essentially.
basically.
Is that the thing we sterilize medical equipment?
Hell yeah, it is. So autoclaves, they're not necessarily bad inside of tequila production, right? But imagine a giant metal tube, right, that you can put medical equipment into, and then you use two swinging doors and you cap it and you turn it up, right? You turn up that heat, and what happens? It gets hot in there, and that heat in those agaves creates steam and it cooks it. Now, Código, great example of a tequila that is made with an autoclave. It makes a very clean tasting, product. However, Mezcal, we know, is quite smoky, and that comes from the more traditional production methods, which I'm going to show you in later slides. Now, the milling process. So this is where you take your cooked agaves now, and you're like, okay, how do we shred these down so that we can then use these to ferment them and then get the juices that are fermented to then distill, to then get our Mezcal. The only reason this matters is because traditional methods like using a molina, like a bat to mill it with by hand, or using a tahona or a wheel, right, to crush these agave fibers, that takes time. And time is beautiful because time means flavor. The reason for this is because there are natural yeasts that exist all around the world, right? And yeasts like to eat sugars and poop out alcohol and carbon dioxide. It's a very reductive way to describe them.
So do donkeys.
So do donkeys. But we can get into that story in a little bit. But what happens here is if it takes more time in the process, it means natural yeasts are getting involved, which builds flavor, right? Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But in this process, where they can use a diffuser, that's basically using a mechanical shredder, spraying them down with carcinogenic chemicals, and taking 99% of all fermentable sugars out of them. It's not traditional in the slightest. It's quite gross. It makes really nasty agave nectar. That's how it's all made, pretty much. It's not fun. Then fermentation, right? Wood, stone, or stainless. Stainless has never been a part of Mezcal production. The only reason that they're allowing these like hyper modern methods now is because they try to copy and paste some of the rules from tequila. They're like, oh, this is cool in tequila, so it's gotta be okay for Mezcal, right? It's bullshit. Finally, stills. Stills inside of Mezcal. Generally speaking, we're distilling something, right? We're taking its essence from it, and that's how we get these wonderful spirits. Generally speaking, these stills are quite small, right? They're very small compared to today's giant standards like J. Rieger & Co. They've got what would be massive stills compared to what we actually find in the palenques that make mezcal down in Oaxaca. And those stills are tiny compared to what Bacardi uses to make their rum, right? So the smaller the still, generally speaking, the richer and more oily that flavor you're going to get, which is really delicious and fun. So they allow for continuous stills to be used, which who here knows what a column still is? Some of us. Easiest way to think about it. They put in, imagine if you've got a Quaker Oats container, right? We're in the Midwest, we all know what that one looks like, right? You take the top fucking lid, all right? You poke a bunch of holes in it, and you put them in about every few feet, right? You've got a heating element on the bottom, and you're pumping in your fermented juice up top. It drips down through our little holes inside of what we're gonna call plates, the little lid, right? And reaches the basin where it's got the heating element. Heats up to about 172 degrees Fahrenheit, and it starts to come up as vapor. It hits that first plate that's nice and cold, where it condenses and falls back down until it warms that plate enough to where it can continue to go up. Every single time that it goes through a plate and heats up, condenses, falls, heats up, escapes as vapor, it goes through a redistillation. That's how you see vodka that's 6 times distilled. It came through 6 plates, right? A pot still, think of like a crock pot, okay? You can only cook in a crock pot once before you have to clean it, right? Continuous stills, not the same. Crock pots also, like Kansas City barbecue, low and slow, which means more flavor, right? Now, we can get into more of that discussion and also different types of stills that they use in mezcal and why that matters in a little bit, but I wanted to at least get us sipping on mezcal. So I think it's important that we talk about what's in our glass today, right? Moving on to the next slide. You are drinking Vago Espadín. So Mezcal Vago is actually a wonderful love story, right? We're starting off with Espadín because I actually just really wanted to show you the plant itself that it comes from and that we have them here, and also what those things can grow up to taste like. Now, Vago's really interesting. So inside of his production process, it's really interesting. So the piñas, the heart of the agave, right, that is used inside of mezcal production, they're placed into a giant earthen oven, essentially. We're gonna get to slides of it here in a little bit. And that can hold up to 12 tons. Thanks. This is the bottle. You may pass it around. Please don't open it to then take sips out of. So what's interesting, his pits can hold 12 tons of agave, which is over double what anyone else in his village can do. His tahona his giant like milling stone is triple the size of anyone else's in his village. So he's able to produce significant volume when it comes down to it. But also it's really intriguing because he's only got a 300 liter still, which is like about yay big, yay tall, right? Relatively small, but for his village, it's actually one of the larger ones. Also, this lav mic is trying to get inappropriate with me right now. Keep that up there. So he only does 2 distillations when he's making his mezcal, pretty traditional. And his cuts are really about the taste and smell of the mezcal as opposed to where the ABV is sitting, which is very, very interesting. I've got more information up here about, you know, where the water comes from, how it's distilled, more on his stills, etc. if you're interested. And also, if anyone wants the slides at the end of the presentation, happy to send them over in case you want to review. Now, I think it's important though, if we're gonna keep talking about mezcal, that we keep drinking mezcal. So please move on to mezcal number 2. Remember, let's do our 2 tastes. Talk to me. What do you guys get? Fresh? Absolutely. What kind of fresh? Are we talking like cucumber fresh? Are we talking like spring water fresh? Sweet?
Yeah.
Sweet fresh?
Citrus.
Yeah. Kind of zesty. It's very fun. Anyone else get like strong notes of ginger?
It's bright.
Floral, bright.
Yeah.
It's got like briny, salt.
Yeah, huge salinity component here. The minerality is off the charts. What else do we get?
Moist corn silk.
Moist corn silk. Fuck yeah.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. I also feel like I'm licking granite. Like it is just, this is so minerally and it's delicious, right? It's also got a relatively high acidity if you notice. I imagine everyone in here, your mouth is starting to water a little bit right now, which is great because then you take a second sip of mezcal and you're refreshing yourself. Now, any guesses as to what this is?
Mezcal.
You win the class again.
Sassy spice.
Well, we will get into it, but this is an artisanal mezcal, right? So we just talked about industrial. Now, legally speaking, this is how artisanal is described. This is the minimum standard here at Fern Bar, right? And this is basically speaking what you want to see when you're getting mezcal. Jared, if you want to go ahead and grab bottle number 2, we're going to get into it. So it's cooked in underground ovens, very important. It's also, generally speaking, utilizing fire. So what happens is, we're gonna see in a slide that we get these plants, right? These piñas, and we go ahead and take them, we put them onto an open fire, right? Big pile of coals. You can go ahead and hide that for a second. Big pile of coals. And then they cover it up with agave fibers, right? With bagasso. And that bagasso is really important because it creates a steam oven. So we get that smokiness from mezcal because we're literally using fire and we're also doing it underground. So it's interesting because the methanol and furfural levels inside of mezcal are much higher than they are in tequila. They're nowhere near the kind of levels that are gonna hurt you, by the way, so don't worry about it. Milling. This milling process, you're not allowed to use a diffuser, you're not allowed to use roller mills. You have to do this either by hand or with a tahona, right? The tahona or a molina, depending on what part of Oaxaca you're in, is that giant stone wheel that goes around, and we're gonna have pictures of it here in a second. Fermentation, only traditional methods, so like hollowed out stones, right? Open pine vats, tree trunks, animal skins can be used as well. So very traditional, just think natural, like man-made components, right? Maybe man-altered, like if you're carving out a stone basin, but non-metal, basically. Finally, distillation is going to come from direct flame. A lot of the time, this is going to be from mesquite wood or whatever wood is local to the area that is used on the still itself. Those can be made of copper or clay, with coils of clay, copper wood, stainless steel, possibly. And what's really important is it says right here, may include fiber. So I'll show you what the fiber inside of the juice looks like, and we'll talk about why that matters. So now that we are on there, This is Mezcal number 2. This is Banas Espadin Barril. So this is going to be 90% Espadin, which is that cute little agave I was just passing around, and then 10% Barril, which adds a lot of earthiness, a lot of minerality as well. This is also one of the more affordable cocktail mezcales for our industry friends and home bartenders. This is what we use in a lot of our drinks. We've got a great relationship with CNI Brands, their importer. And what's really neat is this is a conglomerate. So there are about 35 plus or minus families that actually contribute to Banas. So they're taking a smaller amount of production from a ton of different families, blending it together, which aids in consistency. And also it means that it's a little bit more sustainable, right? They're able to keep their production going at the same level, but then come together and make a greater thing. That's actually why we love working with these guys, because that helps put a lot of money back into that community, which is very neat. Any questions so far?
This one wasn't as smoky to me. What makes that difference between like super smoky? Is it the ABV? Is it the way it's distilled?
It's a great question. So ABV sometimes can contribute to it. Obviously, alcohol by volume means the amount of the booze itself that's there. The rest, generally speaking, can be in different spirits. A lot of times they'll cut with water. In a lot of mezcales, they actually don't do much cuts, if anything at all. So most of this is actually going to come from the kind of wood that was used during the cook process, how long it was cooked for. 5 to 7 days is a relatively long time. There are some brands that go for a full month where they'll let it set underground, so it gets super, super smoky. Also, the barril, I imagine here, adds an earthiness and a minerality, but it doesn't have as much of that smoke characteristic. I would advise going back and forth, though, between these two. There are also two different, well, technically there are 36 different producers here because there's one producer for the first one, and this is a blend on the second. We are gonna now sip on some Ancestral when we get to Mezcal number 3. Ancestral is going to be like the OG way of making mezcal. This is a giant pain in the ass. It is very difficult. It takes a lot of expertise because, believe it or not, these stills that they're using and the production processes are relatively rudimentary. Everything is practically done by hand. Everything is done with raw material, practically speaking, and it's a very difficult process. It's beautiful to watch in person, but you got to cook it in stone pits. Can't do anything else. We're going to see it here in a little bit. Giant pits in the ground, lined with stone. You put your agaves in with the fire, bury it, and let it cook. And that's it. You're not allowed to do anything else. This has to be also hand milled. So when we're taking those cooked agaves and breaking them down into the fibers, right, to start the fermentation process, you do that with your hands. And it's crazy. So there's a picture, we'll get to see in a little bit, from Santa Catarina, Minas, of these molinas, these wooden baseball bats that they have carved by hand that they mash with. And it's hilarious because, you know, they have the gringo bartenders come up and start mashing for a little bit. And we'll go for like 5-10 minutes until we're tired. They do this for hours every single day. It's unbelievable. Like, you have to be so fucking strong to make this happen. Fermentation is really interesting too because it is, once again, rudimentary. Hollowed out stones, soil, or tree trunks, stone basins, animal skins, or containers made from wood or clay. And it can include the bagasso, the agave fibers inside of there. Why that matters is because those little fibers, the ones that have been mashed, right, by hand, that means that they've been exposed to natural yeast, so they have more flavor. And it's very cool because when you include that fiber, you're including a lot of that yeast, you're building layers of flavor, which is beautiful. Finally, distillation. Direct flames in a clay pot, right? This is nuts. Can't have coils made of clay or wood, and it may include the bagasso fibers inside the still. I can't wait to show you the whole production process that I get to witness at Santa Catarina, Minas. But before that, thanks to Kyle, who left just a minute ago, we're gonna go ahead and sip on a very crazy mezcal. So mezcal number 3, this is Ancestral in production. But talk to me, what do you guys taste?
Minerality, not as much as one, but more than 2.
Yep.
It's rounder, like a bigger mouthfeel to it.
Yeah, fucking humongous.
Oil. I got oil.
Anyone kind of get like the sandy dirt element here too?
But not leathery
But I disagree. I think this one's actually pretty leathery.
compared to number 1.
not compared to number one, but this is like, when that one was like porky to me, this one's more like freshly tanned vegetable leather, like vegetable tanning. This is, you know, that fresh wallet smell, right? They haven't used any dye on it. It's just like, you can smell it all day. New, like not new car, definitely not, like a more raw.
New baseball glove.
New baseball glove, absolutely. Anyone else also get that cucumber like freshness at the very back of the palate?
I was gonna say so earlier. It was like
Yeah.
more greenery to it.
Yeah, a lot of rosemary to this.
I think it's kind of cheesy.
Cheesy? What kind of cheese?
I don't know.
Talk to me about the cheese.
Some sort of funky cheese. I just don't like.
Put your finger on it. Move beyond detection, get to identification.
It took a minute for the cucumber, but I did get
Like, I wouldn't say blue cheese that's really loud. So like something like Gruyere and herbal Havarti has that. Two cheeses.
You can see Gruyere,
Yeah.
for sure. Anybody else? What kind of fruit elements are we getting out of this?
very like it has like a coating, like a mouthfeel.
Yeah. To me, it's kind of like plantains where it's like starchy at the back, you know?
If there was a tapache version of plantains and you infuse it
Fuck
with
yeah.
ceramic, that's what I'm doing.
Yep, absolutely. The ceramic is like stupid apparent here. Like, it's fun. Y'all want to know what you're sipping on?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So this one's real fun. But before we get there, this is what the milling looks like. So when I was at Santa Catarina, Minas with Del Miguel, this is the molina that we're talking about. So this is a concrete trench, or not concrete, it's a stone trench right here that they've cut into the rock. What's amazing about it is these bats are yay tall. The base of them is this big around. That wood is dense hardwood. So they're sitting there just push, 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 all day.
Where you go to work out your frustrations.
Oh yeah, and like this guy's got a lot of frustrations. Look at that giant pile of cooked agave in the back, right? It's fucking crazy. The done stuff, right? Just on the ground. When I say this is a rudimentary process, it is a rudimentary process. But it makes some of the biggest, most delicious, full flavored things in the world. When we're talking about the wonderful pits that this is roasted inside of, you can see right here, so this is the fire that got built up, and then this is a layer of bagasso right here. That bagasso, the leftover spent agave fibers from the last round of distillation, right? And so they cover that up with the bagasso, and you can see right here, that fire's covered up with bagasso, fresh pinas are being added into it. So basically, cover up around there with the pina. So they get the pinas from the field. Our little baby agave grows into a big one. They hack off the pencas, the sword-like little arms that can poke you and cut you. They then cut those into pieces, put them inside of here, cook it, right? Then they go through that process of milling it, either with that giant molina or tahona, and also potentially mashing it by hand. They then take it, ferment it, put it into the stills, generally distill it twice, and then that's when you can drink it, after you let it rest for a little bit. Onto this is the fermentation tanks at Santa Catarina, Minas. So this is the bagasso, the agave fibers, right? Inside with the liquid from the agave plant after it gets cooked. Generally speaking, I've seen them add water into the process. There's no problem with that. And then this is a giant ass open air pine vat, which is very cool. And there's a lot of spirituality also mixed into the production process. You'll see crosses all over. You'll generally see like little ofrendas, the shrines to like past ancestors. Usually there's a picture of Jesus somewhere around, because his first miracle was very cool. I very much support the idea of him turning a shit ton of water into a shit ton of wine for a bunch of people who are already drunk. Like, that sounds great. I think I'd like this guy. But it's very much involved in the production process. Now, moving on to distillation. This is the Maestro Mezcalero, whose name is completely escaping me right now, and I could not remember for the life of me earlier, and I feel terrible about it because it was his home and he invited us into it. But you can see right here, there is direct fire, and then this is just clay bricks that are built up. You can see spent bagasso right here, all mounted up, and it's really hard to see with the shitty TV, but there's steam escaping out of right here. This is where they put in the bagasso as well as the juice, right? Which is very cool. And then this right here This is the still itself, the very top of it. It's amazing. It's made of clay. They'll use these things until they crack, and then they use that cracked clay, break it down, and add it into clay to make the bricks to then continue to build with. It's amazing. It's also, like I said, quite rudimentary. When you look inside, and Jared was asking earlier what that coil means, right? What they'll do is they'll put a copper bowl on the top, and they've got cold running water that goes over it, right? Because when hot steam comes up, the hot alcohol vapors rise, they hit that cold bowl, they condense, they fall. What do they condense onto? This itty bitty little string. And where do they get caught then? How do they get outside? You can see that there's a bamboo rod right here where the alcohol is coming out of the still, but how does it make it from the string to there? They have this little carved wood piece, literally. It's just this wood piece. It sits underneath that string, chilling there, gets dripped into, and then it goes through that little cut and goes into that bamboo rod, and it comes out the other side, and that's how they make their mezcal. It's so fucking cool. And as you can see right here, he's put the still back on, and what did he use to seal it back up with? Bagasso. Just shoved back in place. Bagasso around it. It is like very, very, very old school. Very fun though. So what were we sipping on? Gracias a Dios, Tepestate. Now, why does this matter? And why is this very cool? This plant takes 25 years to mature before it can be harvested, right? Think about like your favorite bourbon that's ever been made. All it takes is 1 year for the corn to be made, right? It gets harvested, it gets turned into White Dog, it gets put into barrels, and then all of a sudden you got bourbon. It's drinkable about 4 years later, right? That plant took another 21 years just in the field to reach maturity, right? They talk about a lot of maestro mezcaleros will actually do their first tepestate when they're a relatively young mezcalero, and then they're going to make their next tepestate when they're a relatively old mezcalero, because it's a hard plant to grow, it takes a lot of time, and there's only gonna be a few batches unless that's all they're specializing in and just replanting and replanting and replanting. So this, out of the entire lineup, I'm just gonna tell you, like, drink it now. It is pricey juice, but I'm glad that we have it. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Integrity, for donating a little bottle for us. Any questions so far?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understood so that specific plant doesn't mature to make mezcal for 25 years, or that's what they like deem when they want to harvest it?
Yeah, so basically at 25 years, the starch content inside of the plant will have finally hit the massive amount of starches that they need, because with heat, starches are converted over to sugars, and the yeast are the ones that eat the sugars. So it takes a long time for that plant to get to the point where it already has enough natural sugar and natural starches that it can actually be turned into a mezcal, because you don't want to let it go for any less time, because then you're going to get less of a yield out of it. Also, think about like eating a green banana. Like, it sucks, right? You want it to sit and let it ripen.
So the like recycling of the clay bricks, is it the bagasso?
Yeah.
The utilization of that, does that have like an effect, would you say, on the flavor of the mezcal, similar to like a Solera would, or?
I wouldn't say similar to Solera, because the idea there is we're using old product alongside of new, which is, it's a great question. I would definitely say though, like, if you have been cooking, you know, and creating mezcal and using, what?
They said the ancestors got me.
Oh, sorry about that. And you've been cooking inside of it, right? And you then use that same clay to put into the fresh clay to then make it, of course it's gonna have impact. Now, is that tangible and measurable? Probably not. But we know that, like, it definitely has impact. And also, it's incredibly sustainable. Like, think about it. There's reutilizing resources there. There's no, you know, fast fashion in mezcal. It's really, really, really sustainable. Now we're on to a tepestate, which is a style of agave. So it is a different agave in its entirety. So it's going to have a different flavor profile and different characteristic to it, generally speaking. And we've got another from Palenqueros. We've also got another tepestate over there. So if you wanted to like save a little bit and then A/B it, great idea for later after the class. But the smokiness really comes from the cook, predominantly speaking. So the longer it stays in that pit, the more of that smoke characteristic it's going to get. But a lot of times too, the agave varietal will have impact. Great question.
Do mezcals have noms like tequilas do, where like a certain distillery will make several different?
Yes and no. So in tequila, for those of you who were here for my class last time, every single bottle of tequila has got what it's called a nom number on it. It's fantastic because you can track the specific tequila back to the specific distillery, and using an app called Tequila Matchmaker, you can then see exactly how the production process went, right? So you can find out everything about it. There is no analog for that inside of Mezcal. So there are nom numbers that are occasionally on bottles. I don't remember on this one where they've got it. Jerry, did you find it on this bottle?
Did I? No, I did not. I just handed it to you. I can look it up.
So most of the time you're going to be able to find that little seal on the side, but unlike inside of tequila production where you can look and be like, oh yeah, this is a diffuser and a column still, so like trash, throw it out. It's a little more tricky when you're looking for good mezcales because it's not quite as simple, unfortunately. So history of mezcal. So kind of the story that gets told is that there was a goddess, right, from the Zapotec people. And what happened was a lightning struck the agave plant, and Mayahuel, the goddess, jumped out of the plant, giving the Zapotec people construction materials, because the agave plant can be used to construct homes. It shoots up a stemma quiote that dries and hardens and can be used as building material. If you look to, these are really sharp little guys, right? Here at the end, it can be used as sewing needles, right? To make clothing. The fibers can also be broken down into clothing. And most importantly, if you take an agave plant and you scrape the top of it, carve a little bowl, it will bleed out its aguamel, its honey water, and it will naturally ferment and make what's called pulque. I would highly advise against drinking pulque here in the United States. All of that has been pasteurized. It's gross. I do not like it, but fresh pulque down in Oaxaca, like, it is a very different kind of buzz that you will get. It is very fun and delicious. Now, let's also talk a little bit about colonialism, right? There is a relatively, it's a borderline racist perception that the Spanish brought distillation to the Mexican people and to the Zapotec people and to all of the different tribes that were down there. There's actually evidence of pre-colonial distillation happening at different sites throughout Mexico. At this point, we think that there's enough consequential, like, just hard evidence to prove otherwise. I believe the most recent edition of Difford's Guide has talked about it. I also know that many of my friends that are inside of the agave world have been pushing to present this proof, basically, and say, yeah, like, of course this wasn't brought. Now, there are different still types and different still styles that were then adopted into mezcal production, but I mean, these people invented the fucking wheel. They invented the calendar. I would be hard pressed to think they weren't smart enough to then invent a way to distill something, right? Like, if you can make a house out of the center of a plant, like, I'm betting that you're probably pretty smart and probably smarter than I am today, right? Now, this tradition on making mezcal, right, taking this pulque and then realizing, oh yeah, we can cook this plant. If we cook the plant, it will ferment, and then we can take its juices and distill it. That was passed down through families, traditionally, family member to family member. So there's not a whole lot of written history around this, but it's all lived history. And that's why we can look back and see, like, oh yeah, like at some of these ancient sites, this was obviously a distillation site, and this was prior to colonial invasion of the Spaniards. So, like, yeah, it's been around for a while. Now, let's go ahead, jump into mezcal number 4, because I have to tidy this class up very quickly because I have been rambling for quite a minute. I obviously hate this subject a whole lot. Cheers. Mezcal number 4. Wildly different, right? Fresh black dirt. It is just tastes like dirt. Tastes like grapes, right? Like a nice red grape. It's sweet. but that minerality is off the charts. The acidity is not too crazy, but it tastes so dry to me, right? Like the sides of my tongue are just like begging for a glass of water right now. What else do you guys get? Ginger? Yeah, absolutely. What else?
Got like some licorice.
Licorice, absolutely, like black licorice. Yeah, you can see that a little bit of anise quality to it.
It's a nice like hickory barbecue rub.
Yeah, 100%. What else? What kind of sweetness are we talking about here? Like pretty starchy, right? Kind of dusty. But if we were to talk about a kind of fruit that we taste here, what kind of fruit are we going to pull out of this?
A lot of grape.
A lot of grape. So today, before we get into which mezcal it is, let's talk about where this comes from, right? So depending on who you ask, mezcal can come from either all of Mexico, or legally speaking, it can come from 9 to 11 states. This is now a hotly contested thing that we'll talk about in the problems. But right here is, so Zacatecas, 1994, this was allowed to produce mezcal. Same with Durango. Tamaulipas was only introduced in 2003 as a legally mezcal producing state. San Luis Potosi right here in Puebla, very different timelines there. Puebla just joined in 2015, which is crazy because think about the fact that people have been producing bourbon here forever. Imagine if you went to Kentucky and you're like, you guys can make bourbon, but California, absolutely not. New York, I know you've been making it forever, but you can't, right? That's crazy because a lot of Mexico has been making mezcal that isn't part of this list. Now, let's also look at who's been producing the most volume of mezcal. In blue here with the lion's share, we have Oaxaca, right? 90% plus of what we consume when it comes to mezcal is produced in Oaxaca. And then it has got a very small split. Puebla jumped up aggressively. They were just in 2015 allowed to start producing mezcal and legally labeled as mezcal. But because of that, they got a nice jump with technology as well. You can see a nice little breakdown here. This website is also phenomenal if you want to visit. I'm definitely stealing these graphics from them to show you guys because I thought these were such wonderful representations of the knowledge that they've got. But number 4, El Jilguero Mexicano. So this is an 8-year-old plant. Still, it took a while for this thing to grow. It's very impressive. It's also very tasty, but Mexicanos are always, to me, on that kind of gravelly, smoky, dusty side, right? Pretty big giveaway. El Jilguero is also a phenomenal company. They do a wonderful job of sourcing. So if you're ever looking for a quality mezcal, I would highly recommend them. Let's go ahead and get our 2 tastes on mezcal number 5. This is also one that I pulled out of our personal collection here at Fern Bar. This one's special. Fruity. Spicy. What kind of spice? Are we talking baking spices? Are we talking the spice out of a pepper?
Chili spice.
Like chili spice, yeah. Are we talking dried chilies? Are we talking fresh chilies?
Get more of the dry.
Dry? Okay. Kind of like ancho. I also get serrano pepper. That's that juiciness, right? When you bite into it, you're like, oh yeah, this isn't burning my face like a jalapeno would, right? It's almost got the sweetness of a habanero as well, without all of that heat that comes with it. It's delicious. It also kind of tastes like the best fresh strawberry, right, with its acidity. It's really nice. For sake of time, jumping over to problems in the category. This is something I could speak about for 30 minutes at a minimum, but I'm gonna try to tidy this up very quickly. Unfortunately, because of a ton of money getting thrown into the category, because for the first time since, 1946, I believe, agave sales are on pace, and for the last few years have been on pace to outsell vodka. Now, the problem is agave spirits, the vast, 99% majority, come from Mexico. We consume 90% of the tequila that is made here in the United States, and we are starting to consume a shitload of the mezcal that's made here in the United States. The reason this is important is because Mezcal isn't an industrial process. This is not from modern times where we've got all of this equipment that we've gotten used to making bourbon with, right? This is an old ancient art generally made for the people in the community, right? It's a very community-based thing. When we were down in Chichicapa, they just had their fiesta and they made a fiesta mezcal that was lower ABV just for their friends and family, right? So when we look at then the production processes and then brands moving into the region, people are being taken advantage of, right? So these mezcaleros are not college educated for the most part. You know, they don't know how to read legal contracts. And so for a very long time, they were buying bottles of mezcal for pennies on the dollar, shipping them across the border, and then flipping them and fucking them over. It's very important to us here at Fern Bar that we not only make sure that we're telling the stories of the maestro mezcaleros that are behind these brands, but also that we're supporting the ones that actually give back to their communities, right? Because many of the brands that you see up there aren't brands that the community was like, hey, let's design the art, let's design that label, let's put this together and let's ship it ourselves. These are brands that are coming in and going, hey, can we purchase bulk product from you that we can sell and label ourselves? So it is incredibly important when we're sourcing, right, to think about, you know, where's this coming from? Who is this coming from? So when I am talking then about how to buy mezcal and how to pick a bottle here in this, first off, fantastic bottling here from Palenqueros. So this is Alberto Ortiz. He is on the label. This is his Espadín. So what's really fun about this is Espadín. The first two that we had, the first one was exclusively Espadín. The second one had Espadín in it. It's like a $120, $130 bottle. It's spectacular. But it's very important to tell the story of the person that this comes from and also make sure that they're getting compensated well for it. Not to name too many names, but like, look at the big spirit companies like Diageo, right? See who they're sourcing from. See if they mention, if their website mentions the Maestro Mezcalero by name, right? Look at how they're talking about the story of the brands. Because if they're not paying homage to the brand, if they're not paying homage to the individual that created it, are you sure they're compensating them well? Also, when it comes down to it, feel free, like, look at our back bar. These are all brands that we vetted, that we support, and brands that we really care about and think do a wonderful job. Finally, like I was talking about, inside of the states that can produce mezcal, this is where it's bullshit, right? There's so many different producers that have to make Distilled de Agave, right? Because they aren't willing to pay the CRM, the Consejo Regulatory de Mezcal, the amount of money to come out and test their product, approve it, say that, you know, this isn't poisonous, but also it falls inside of our strict categories that we have now legally defined, even though you've been producing it for hundreds of years by yourself. And so they have to label their product as something that feels a little bit less than, right? Also, the Consejo has put in place new rules on methanol and furfural levels, right? Because the big guys who cook in autoclaves don't have to worry about those levels, right? Because they're doing it inside of a device made to sanitize medical equipment. But if you can then impose rules and bump out some of the other smaller producers because their methanol and furfural levels are higher, that goes very much in your favor as an industrial producer, which means we lose out on brands like this, right? So a great example, far right over there, some of the craziest agave products we've ever had in the bar, Chocolo. Chocolo is a Distilled de Agave, right? One of the best mezcales that exists, but also not a product that people are gonna look at and be like, oh yeah, like that is a mezcal. You wouldn't know unless you really were into it, right? So it's a very important process to go through, like looking at these brands, looking at how they're treating people, looking at, you know, the person in the face behind it, and recognizing that, like, we are in a capitalist society and we vote with our dollars, right? So going into this and not flying blind is very important. So we've gone through the how to pick a mezcal, problems in the category a little bit, and in the last couple of minutes, are there any other questions?
What does it mean? It says it's young.
What do you mean?
Joven?
Yeah, joven just means young. So inside of tequila, this is a great question that got brought up in the tequila class. Joven inside of tequila means, generally speaking, it is a mixto tequila, so low quality, not 100% of the fermentable sugars coming from agave, and also that they add caramel coloring and, generally speaking, a little bit of sweetness into it. Think Cuervo, right? The only Joven that we're aware of in tequila that is quality is Libelula, which is our well, additive-free, blend of 20% Reposado, 80% Blanco. Joven inside of Mezcal just means young, right? So this is gonna be an unaged product, and it is nothing like a Joven tequila. What other questions do we have?
So someone that enjoys like tequila and mezcal, how do you then like kind of vet mezcals? Because like you mentioned Tequila Collective, like there's kind of resources out there for tequila to get like good, ethically made, additive-free tequila. How do you vet mezcal?
So there's a phenomenal book called How the Gringos Stole Tequila. It actually covers a lot about mezcal. Also, David Suro just came out with a book, absolutely spectacular. Goes way more in depth than anything I could do inside of an hour. And I would highly recommend taking a peek at it. I've got a signed copy you can take a look at here in the front vestibule's display case. But yeah, David's a homie and one of my mentors. Great guy. What other questions do we have?
I apologize if this is like somewhat politically charged, but are you
Fucking charge it up. Let's go.
Are you like at all concerned, or do you have any preparations for like if there are tariffs?
Yeah, tariffs went into effect today, and it's absolutely stupid. It is one of the most ridiculous and unfortunate things that has happened inside of the liquor industry. When it comes to, and I'll get political, I'm happy to do it. That's why I own this bar, right? Getting political about this, Trump is making really stupid decisions with his tariffs, and this is going on YouTube, and I'm happy to say this out loud with my face to the camera. Terrible ideas. Now, the reason for this is because Mexico is a trade partner of ours, right? Of course drugs are coming across the border. Of course immigrants are coming in illegally. Like, that happens, right? That's just part of being a country. And yeah, is border security a national concern? Absolutely. Is our information a national concern? Absolutely. But we shouldn't punish small producers. We shouldn't punish small brands. And also, we drink 90% of the tequila that's made. We drink a lot of the mezcal that's made. This is only hurting American people because as a business owner, I unfortunately, pretty soon when we run out of the stock that we have here in the United States of tequila and mezcal, and we go for the next round of importing things, it's gonna cost us 25% more, right? What I will promise to you here at Fern Bar, at least as of right now on this day, because who knows what tomorrow will bring, when we increase prices, because we will have to, it will literally be the difference in cost to us, right? We're not gonna mark everything up 25% extra to make money on it. We're just gonna cover that cost that unfortunately we now have to pay. A lot of that is actually gonna get put onto the importer as well, which is bullshit because my friends that own importation companies are getting fucked over aggressively. So what's going on in the world is just hurting the American people. It's not good for any of us. It is incredibly frustrating because it doesn't matter left, right, centrist, whatever the fuck you believe. Spending more money sucks. None of us like to do it. We like to hang on to our dollars and cents, right? Because I want to spend it on more mezcal.
Is mezcal subject to like the political battle that tequila is in Mexico?
Fuck yeah, it is.
It's crazy.
Yeah, do you see all the money that got dumped into tequila? All of that money is now getting dumped into mezcal.
Such an intriguing thing.
Well, and I mean, I didn't even touch on monocultural agricultural production processes that are destroying the soil of fields, right? And I didn't get a touch on superbugs that are being created because of the chemicals that are starting to get used on plants and how that's super aggressive and terrible. I also didn't get a touch on whether you clone plants or you actually allow them to go to seed and pollinate, which kills the plant. Okay.
You said there's several states that are given the right to make what we call mezcal. So what determines that?
Politics. So basically, without going way too far into it, because I don't have the time, like I said, there are those 9 states that have historically been allowed to make mezcal. Money is getting thrown at it, right? Inside of tequila production, for instance, Tamaulipas doesn't produce tequila, but they can grow Blue Weber agaves there. And so because the industry is consuming so many Blue Weber agaves, they allowed that to be part of the 5 that can make tequila because they need the Blue Webers, right? I would not be surprised in the next few years if we see another state get introduced so they can start sourcing more espadín and having more room to grow, right?
And can they bring any agave that's grown outside of the state? Because I mean, what's the difference between them? I guess elevation.
So the answer is no.
Down the street from here.
You get what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of times where shit gets chucked around, and you know, sometimes it shows up, and sometimes it just magically appears. But also, a lot of times, you know, these farmers will have their own fields, and so they'll just harvest from there.
So the Appalachian moonshine guy background thing is that this is just what they've legally said they can sell to us, right?
Yeah.
It's not saying that they're not making this stuff everywhere.
Yes,
That just
absolutely
means that
correct.
That just means they can't put it on a truck.
So to sell it to us, if it's not from one of the mezcal producing states, Distilled de Agave, and
They're
we get
making
it.
hooch all over this country.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And it's some of the best hooch you've ever had in your life.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you try any down there that was like,
Oh yeah, yeah. Like it was like when I told you the story when I was in Chichicapa. It's a whole other presentation that I did a whole other class on. But when I was in Chichicapa, like I said, they had just had their fiesta. And so they handed us a Gatorade bottle full of the Fiesta Mezcal. And they're like, yo, American bartenders, we really like you. Thanks for being here. Drink this when you get back to your hacienda and like hang out. And they all had forgotten about said bottle of Fiesta Mezcal because there was plenty of cervezas and cigarettes and more Mezcal that day. So your boy may or may not have ended up getting that bottle back into the United States, and then I poured it for my friends. So it was tight. It was really cool. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out, Jared.
You're going to talk about the worm today.
Yeah, sometimes they put a worm at the bottom as a marketing gimmick. It's the worm that eats the agave plant. It actually has nothing to do with a bottle of quality mezcal. There's one brand, Oaxaca Mezcal, that puts it at the very bottom as a marketing gimmick that is a quality producer, but Monte Alban that puts it in all of their bottles, it's generally trash. So don't drink that shit.